Wukong is one of League's oldest champions. He's always had a very simple and straightforward kit, and he's always been sort of a mediocre champion. The old version of Wukong never really worked as a bruiser in the top lane. He was designed for the top lane, but really he was more of a mid laner. The only Wukong players that were ever able to be successful on Wukong were Wukong players that built him full lethality and went full burst on him. The old version of Wukong never really survived in the top lane due to the fact that he was just too squishy and won very few 1v1s. The new version of Wukong has been out for roughly a week now, and on the first day of his release, he had a disgusting 60% win rate. The one-trick players who played old Wukong did not, however, like this new version. Many of them even called for hotfix buffs on the first day, and Riot responded to this by instead nerfing Wukong. What makes new Wukong so strong that he deserves day 1 nerfs? And what is the best build and proper way to truly abuse this champion for free elo? Let's take a look at why new Wukong is so broken. Old Wukong's passive was very simple, Stone Skin. Wukong gains a small amount of armor and magic resist for each visible enemy champion. His new passive now gives armor and max HP regen for 5 seconds. This new passive only gives armor, but it stacks upon itself, which means that when Wukong is in a sustained fight, he gains free stats. His new passive solves the problem of his early game, and it's actually so strong that he now has one of the best level 1s in the entire game. If he's able to stack up at his maximum amount, he's able to get 30 armor at level 1. Imagine having 3 extra cloth armors walking into your lane. The truly ridiculous part of this is that you get so much free armor that it's like having an armor item. Deadman's Blade and Sunfire Cape give 60 armor individually. Wukong's passive at level 15 stacks up to 60. His passive is worth an entire armor item. What this basically means is that you don't actually need to build tank on him. You can build bruiser items like Black Cleaver and Sterix Gauge and still deal a ton of damage while still being extremely tanky. This new passive just gives him so many free stats that he simply outvalues everybody else. Now, the biggest reason that a lot of one-trick Wukong players were complaining about new Wukong is because of the changed scalings on a lot of his abilities. His Q and his E used to scale off of bonus AD, but that is no longer the case. His E now scales purely off of ability power. When old Wukong was fed, you could literally come in out of invisibility and insta-kill someone with your combo. That will never be the case ever again with this new version. His new kit is completely revolved around sustained fights. But this does not mean that new Wukong is weak. The trade-off of being unable to instant-gimp squishy champions means that there are a number of tanky champions that you can actually easily 1v1 now. Champions that used to completely destroy Wukong, such as Set, Fiora, Renekton, pretty much any bruiser that had an early game, now they are all dominated by Wukong. The 1v1s themselves always last 2 rotations of his abilities, but now he can actually beat people in lane. Before, you would have to just wait for your opponent to make mistakes or blow their cooldowns. Now you can actually be the aggressor and go in. And make no mistake, just because Wukong doesn't one-shot squishies anymore doesn't mean he's not a threat to them. Any bruiser that builds full damage and has 100 armor at level 10 is not gonna lose a 1v1 against a squishy AD carry. While Wukong might not be as good into mages anymore, he is extremely good into bruisers now. It is going to solidify him as one of the strongest top laners in the current meta. But perhaps the biggest change to new Wukong is his ultimate. His old ultimate's base damage has now been replaced with percentage max HP damage. This makes Wukong even stronger at shredding juggernauts and tanks. Not only that, his Q, which reduces armor, gets its cooldown reduced for every tick of this ultimate, along with any additional damage that Wukong or his clone deals to minions or champions. Your basic trading combo looks something like this. E in to get the gap close, auto attack once and immediately use W, walk slightly forward and Q the opponent to shred their armor with your clone, then use your ultimate to get the maximum amount of damage with your clone. This puts out a disgusting amount of damage, but not only that, it makes your Q only a single second of cooldown. That means you can Q again almost immediately afterwards. In an extended 1v1, Wukong can get anywhere between 2 to 4 uses of his Q. And remember that your ultimate can also be cancelled when you use your abilities. So as you knock up someone with your ultimate, you can immediately burst them out with one of your Qs. So, with the champion this broken, how can you counter Wukong? Wukong's passive no longer gives magic resist, so you would think he's weak into AP matchups like Vladimir and Ryze. But that's actually not the case. The problem with scaling AP champions like Ryze and Vladimir, they can generally farm safely under Darius and Garen, but Wukong has too much mobility for them to be able to stay in lane. While they might be okay in the mid lane because it's a much shorter lane, in the top lane they just get run down by Wukong. Even AP champions with decent 1v1s such as Mordekaiser struggle against Wukong. The best champ to be able to beat Wukong in the early game is Rumble. If you're looking for a tank that counters Wukong, you can go with Poppy. Poppy's W prevents his engage and prevents him from being able to stick onto her. Here's your build on Wukong. For your starting item, you have a few different options. If you're in a lane that you feel like you're going to get poked in, such as Rumble or Aatrox, you can start Doran's Shield. If you're in a lane that you're confident that you can beat 1v1, such as Riven, you can start D-Blade. If you're in a lane that is a bit more sustain orientated, such as Jax, you can start Corrupting Potion instead. For your first back, you can buy Doran's Blade, a longsword, or you can tech Executioner's Calling against certain healing champions. For your first item, you can buy either Blade of the Ruin King or Black Cleaver. With these items, you pretty much just win every single 1v1. The only real weakness of this build is that you're not getting the wave clear you want from Tiamat, which means that you're split pushing and that your roaming is going to be a lot slower. You can get tier 2 boots after finishing either your first or second item. Ninja Tabbies or Merc Treads are both great options for this champion. If you're really snowballing and really ahead, you can opt out of Cleaver and go Trinity Force instead. If you're in a matchup against a really squishy champion and you're snowballing really hard, you can buy Tiamat instead for your first item. The one big weakness of Wukong is that he's really poor at clearing waves. For your next item, you absolutely have to buy Death Dance. It allows you to stay alive longer in fights to be able to stack up your passive and get the maximum value out of it. Then finish off your build with either GA, Sterix Gauge, or Mortal Reminder. For your abilities, max E, Q, then W. For your runes, go Conqueror for the sustained fights, Triumph for the healing, Tenacity, and Last Stand. For your secondary tree, you can take Second Wind, Conditioning, or Bone Plating. Second Wind is for poke matchups, Bone Plating is better for early game trading, and Conditioning is for scaling. Then take Overgrowth for the extra HP. For your rune stats, you can take either double Adaptive Force with 1 resistance, or single Adaptive Force with 1 attack speed. Most champions in the game are strong at a certain point. Take Kassadin for example. Kassadin is one of the worst early game champions ever. But late game, he completely explodes and carries. A champion like Elise has one of the best early games ever. However, once everyone hits level 16, she's pretty much useless. New Wukong is great early game, great mid game, and amazing late game. There is not a single point in the game where he is weak. He's a tanky bruiser that you can still build full damage on. And that is why he is so broken right now.